In part 2 of Angela's Ashes, we experience more of Frank's story and how his family continues to struggle with poverty. This part starts with Frank in school. The teachers are very strict and discourage the students to ask any questions or think anything than what they are told. Frank is invited over to his friend Finton's house and becomes extremely embarrassed and uncomfortable when Finton tries to watch him go to the bathroom. Frank then ditches school, which worries his mother, Angela, when he does not make it home later that night. The father is very neglected and continues to waste his little money he earns on alcohol, while the rest of the family is forced to ask government programs for necessities. This causes much stress for the entire family, but especially Frank because he is the oldest boy. Frank begins to bring in a little money when he begins reading to Mr. Timony. This quickly ends when Mr. Timony is taken to the hospital for the elderly. Even though they are barely surviving, Angela consents to having another child, which they name Alphonsus Joseph. This adds even more chaos to the family. With Catholicism being a very significant part of Irish culture, Frank begins to prepare for his first communion, a huge deal. When the big day finally arrives, the whole family is excited because when a child has their first communion, the child is given money and food at the collection. A big feast is also held, but sadly, the day of, Frank catches typhoid fever and is forced to miss out on all the fun. Typhoid fever forces him to be put into quarantine, where he is accompanied by a fellow patient and a friendly janitor. The three share lots of stories and poems, and this is what keeps Frank happy during his time there. Although he is still very feeble and weak, Frank is let out and sent back to school. Since there is lots of opportunity for work in England because of the war going on, Frank's father decides to leave and promises to send money back to the family. This, of course, never happens. He continues to squander his money in the pubs. Frank is then off to the hospital again because of an eye infection and stays in the hospital for another month. Struggling more than ever, the hopeless mother keeps trying to get money and food from the dispensary, but they are barely given enough to survive. It was also not common that families would help another out, so Angela was completely on her own. Angela starts to get very sick with pneumonia because she is not receiving enough nutrients to keep your immune system strong. And also, Ireland is very cold, so this does not help. This worries the boys. Without their father around, they have no one to comfort them, and therefore Frank is given all the responsibility of taking care of his two little brothers. The mother is taken to the hospital, and the boys are sent to Aunt Aggie's. Aunt Aggie is very strict with the boys, but the living conditions are much better. Although the boys do enjoy living in a dry house, they miss the comfort of their home and their own mother. Upon hearing the news about Angela, the father returns home momentarily, but quickly leaves for England again. The short visit gives the boys some hope that the father still cares. The father sends money for the first time since he moved away, but this is the one and only time he ever does. Again, the boys' hearts are shattered. Part 2 ends with Frank seeing his mother begging for food scraps in front of the church. Upon seeing this, Frank gets extremely embarrassed but does not share what he saw with his siblings or his mother. Begging was seen as a disgrace because it showed that the family had to rely on others to provide for themselves. This ruins their family's dignity, and Frank will never be able to look at his mother the same.